Hey there. Hey, Rachel. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday Together Talk. I am Reverend Rebecca Burrow. Hey there, Lo. Good to see you this evening. I'm Reverend Rebecca Burrow. I am the founder and CEO of Building Reconciliation, Inclusion, Diversity, and Gender Equity. Welcome to Tuesday Together Talk. Tonight, I think we're going to have a really good conversation. And so I want you guys to get engaged in the conversation. As you all know, this has been, Monday was Martin Luther King Day. And I'm thinking that instead of day, we should try to make it into a Martin Luther King month. And perhaps then we will be able to get some things done and get the attention of the people. But for today, we are going to celebrate Martin Luther King Day and as well honor the writings of my husband, the late Dr. Rufus Burrow Jr. So I'm excited to be here. I'm hoping that this conversation is everything that you expected and more. And not only that, I'm hoping that tonight you learned something new or add your thoughts and your voice so that we all learned something new. Because I think the time is now for us to really understand what Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King wanted his dream to be realized. And I'm just hoping that tonight we have a good time. So, as usual, I need for you all to talk back at me. And I want you all to engage in this conversation. And why don't we just start? Just let me know, how did you celebrate King Day? What did you do? What did you do on MLK Day? Just drop me some comments. Let me know what you did on MLK Day. All right, we have good evening. This is Sarah Gilbert. She is now the sun drop. Well, good evening, Sarah. Good evening. I'm glad that you were able to get in. And Lori Clark, we call her Lo, affectionately known as Lo, and Rachel. Anybody else is out there listening tonight, please just drop us a comment. Say hello to us. It's good to hear from you all. And it's always good for you all to share in the conversation with your comments. So let me know, what did y'all do on King Day? Just drop me some comments, all right? What did you do on King Day? So listen, I want to start tonight by reading an excerpt from the introduction in the book Martin Luther King Jr. and the Theology of Resistance, uh, in hopes of answering some of your questions on how did Dr. Rufus Burrow Jr. become known as a Martin Luther King Jr. scholar. Um, so I just want to read just a couple of things, some things to you, so that you get a better sense of how did this man, why do they think he's a King scholar? um, what made him so unique that we call him a King scholar? Hello, Mom. Good afternoon to you. Your hour different. So thanks for joining us this evening. So let me just read to you all just real quickly. Dr. Burrow writes in his book, I have been a professor of theological social ethics for over 30 years at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, Indiana. Having done my doctoral work at Boston University, where Martin Luther King went because he wanted to study the philosophy of personalism under the premier personalist at the time, Edgar S. Brightman. I was, not surprisingly, required to take a course on the life, teachings, and work of King. This was at a time when dissertation after dissertation, book after book was being written on King. Before completing doctoral studies, I had concluded that so much had already and was being written on King that there could not possibly be anything I could contribute to King's studies. This is in large part is why I did not teach or attempt to write on King in the early years of my tenure in the Theological Academy. The field, I believe, was already saturated with writings on King, which I naively took to mean that all that needed to be said about King was in fact being said and said well. Throughout much of the 1980s, then I read very little on King and made little effort to revisit throughout much of the 1980s, then I read very little on King and made little effort to revisit his writings that I had read and studied under John J. Cartwright in graduate school at Boston University in the mid 1970s. It was in a course I was teaching on the church and racism that I reread King's writings on the 1963 Birmingham, Alabama campaign. Afterward, I became intrigued with what King had said about the racism of white liberals and white moderates. Soon thereafter, around the late 1980s, I decided to try my hand at writing an article on the subject and submitted it for publication. It was a couple of years before I heard back from the editor, who said that the journal was interested in publishing the article if I could be willing to include relevant ideas from the Pulitzer Prize winning books Bearing the Cross, Martin Luther King Jr., and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and Pairing the Waters, American in the King Years, by David J. Garrow and Taylor Branch, respectively. I opted not to follow through on the editor's offer, partly because I felt that the assessment of the article should have been based solely on published scholarship at the time I submitted it, and also because by then my interest in King study had once again waned. Then, several years later, I was reading what was premier King scholar Lewis V. Baldwin's second book on King, To Make the Wounded Whole, The Cultural Legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., when I discovered that he had read the manuscript I wrote on King, White Liberals and White Moderates. During Baldwin's research in Atlanta, he discovered a copy of the manuscript in the files of the journal, read it, and referenced ideals from it in his book, because Baldwin implied that I might have something to offer King studies. I decided to begin reading the most recent scholarship on King, as well as his published and unpublished writings. In addition, I decided to offer an annual course on King, which meant that I would need to be aware of the most recent scholarship on King. I found this to be a monumental challenge since the publications on King were constant. In any case, before long, I began writing articles on King. Although the vast majority of these were published in the theological journal Encounter, I also published in the Western Journal of Black Studies, the Lexington Theological Quarterly, the Personalist Forum, etc. In addition, I began receiving invitations from religious organizations, universities, and seminaries to speak and lecture on King, generally for King Day celebrations during Black History Month and also in classes on King at various colleges and seminaries. About 10 years ago, both a colleague at the seminary and a former teacher, Ronald James Allen and James Earl Massey, and this book was written in 2014, so when he referenced 10 years ago, that would have been about 2004, respectively, recommended that I think about publishing a collection of these speeches and lectures. This is how the idea for the present collection came about. In some sense, a common theme runs through most of my writings on King, and the same can be said for this collection. I have been interested in King as one who loved ideas and ideals, who devoted his life as civil rights minister to showing what this could mean concretely in efforts to establish the beloved community. King was convinced that such a community could be established only through organized nonviolent resistance. In my mind, at least the term the theologian of resistance best characterized the Martin Luther King who has emerged from my studies and reflection. This is a king for whom ideals and relentless resistance to injustice are integrally related in ways that make for good and justice in the world. Indeed, for King, as man of ideas and ideals, and as one who was truly educated, it is necessarily followed that he also be devoted to changing or transforming the world in ways that are consistent with God's requirement that love and justice be done. So that is how Dr. Rufus Burrow Jr. got started. And as he mentioned, he did go to school there in Boston where King had studied and earned his PhD. And yet he was not required to take a class. And on King, there was none offered. And as he said, the there was so much being written about King at the time, he really just didn't have the interest in writing. So lo and behold, though, something triggered him, and from there on, he went on to write all the time. So, thank you so much for your comments. Before I move on into our conversation tonight, Sarah Gilbert said, "This year I didn't do anything memorable on King Day." Oh, we're going to change that, Sarah. We're going to change that. Rachel said, "Dr. Roof is a man of change. His work is so amazing." Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for that acknowledgement. So, now I want to I want to move into something that I think we need to wrestle with um, as we all continue to think about Martin Luther King Jr. and celebrating the holiday. How can you help make King's dream a reality? So I want to really get into this conversation tonight by asking you to ponder that question. How can you help make King's dream a reality? And as you're pondering that question, I want to introduce you to a couple of things that are highlighted in Martin Luther King Jr. and the theology of resistance in the book that I was just reading you from. The works of Dr. Rufus Burrow Jr. And I hope that these concepts can help inform how you think about King's dream and what you can do to help make the dream become a reality. Not one of these beliefs that I mentioned to you, that I'm going to mention to you, are divorced from the other. It is how King lived his life, how he went about the work of civil rights, how he was shaped as a preacher and a minister and a leader. So, first, I want to give you King's philosophical belief. King's philosophical belief, and then I want to talk to you then about King's theological belief, and then I want to talk to you about King's doctrine of the dignity of human beings or human dignity. So, those are the three things: King's philosophical belief, King's theological belief, and also King's doctrine of human dignity. So, let's start with King's philosophical belief. King was considered a personalist. King was a personalist, and so his belief was in personalism. And I can't get I can almost hear my husband telling me now, don't even try to tread into that territory, because there's no way I can do the philosophy of personalism. I can't do it any justice in a 1 hour segment, let alone these few minutes I'm gonna try to talk about it. But I do want you to know that it was King's philosophical belief that was really, that's where his beliefs, the way he worked, that's where it was grounded. And so let me just give you a basic definition of personalism, and then we'll talk a little more. And all through the night, I'm going to be reading from my husband's book. I won't read long, detailed paragraphs like I just did, but I think it's important that we learn these things about King so that we can do better about honoring him. So, so let's talk about personalism. In the simplest and broadest terms, personalism is any philosophy that makes mind or personality the ultimate reality or principle of explanation, while also stressing the innate and absolute dignity of human beings. Right? Okay. So I'm going to tell you, and my husband calls it a homespun personalism, because although King studied personalism at Boston as a student, King was actually taught personalism when he was a kid from his mom, his dad, his grandparents. So to the extent that it is possible to say if one of whose life was the civil and human rights struggle, Martin Luther King Jr. was a thoroughgoing personalist. In this sense, he sought to reason personalism out to its logical conclusions in metaphysics, epistemology, the philosophy of religion, and ethics. Long before he was introduced to the term personalism or any of its chief representatives, King was introduced to some of its basic idea through the teachings and example of his parents and grandparents, especially his live-in maternal grandmother, Jeannie Celeste Williams. So parents, y'all need to start thinking about already, how are we teaching our children philosophy without even using the terminology? So as a little boy, King learned from his mother that he was as good as anybody, regardless of race. Indeed, that he was somebody. He was somebody because he was a child of God. He was a being of infinite worth to God, precious and sacred beyond all measures. This was reinforced by his father, who modeled for him what it meant to be in touch with one's own sense of dignity. Daddy King, as Martin Luther King Sr. was called, refused to allow white racists to insult his personhood with impunity. Therefore, he always stood up for himself and his people, at times in the presence of his young son. King also learned from his parents of the principle, namely that persons should love and respect each other as children of God. In addition, as a boy, King learned from the example of his father and maternal grandfather the need for his people to work together cooperatively and with God in order to assert their humanity and dignity, and to demand that they be treated accordingly. He was taught by them the necessity of social protest and struggle if one desired to gain her rights as a human being and citizen of the United States. King was introduced by his father and grandfather to a basic Hegelian principle, namely that progress and growth come through struggle. So we see King's King understanding of personalism stemming from his childhood, but then he was later taught through his professor at Boston the definition of personalism, the philosophy of personalism. And we see that engaged all across the civil rights movement, because King was teaching as well as leading. He was teaching us all that we all have value in God, in the kingdom, because we are God's created children. And not only was he trying to teach Black people that, more importantly, he was also trying to teach white people that all of us, Black, white, whatever color, ethnicity, we all have value because we were created by God. And so King was teaching personalism. It was the foundation of that we have value because we have God in us, and therefore we are shaped by God. So that's the first thing I want you to remember is the philosophy of King, personalism. That was King's philosophy. But then the next thing I want you to understand, I want to talk about is the King's other belief. And you kind of heard it as I was talking about personalism, and that is the belief in the beloved community. Now, my husband says it this way in the book: the beloved community is one in which human beings will live together as brothers and sisters, in which they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, in which they will no longer take necessities from the masses to give luxuries to the classes. A community in which all human beings will respect the dignity and worth of all human personality. So there we go. We wrapping now King's philosophical belief now into King's theological belief in that beloved community. Now let me explain it to you how in simpler forms how we think about the beloved community and what it really means. And then I'm gonna conclude tonight by letting y'all know why we got a lot of work to do because y'all probably know by now. And if you have not answered the question, how can you make King's dream a reality? Please keep pondering and prepare to answer it in the comments. All right. So let me start here. The beloved community was a popular term in the hallways and classrooms at Boston University School of Theology when King was a doctoral student. As far back as 1957, not long after the Montgomery bus boycott, King talked about the coming of the new world, which was essentially what he had in mind when he spoke of the beloved community. The following is a paraphrase of what King said. The beloved community is one in which human beings will live together as brothers and sisters, in which they will beat their swords, that's what I just read to you all, into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, in which they will no longer take necessities from the masses to give luxury to the classes. I want that to really resonate with somebody because I don't know how you all feel about the current times that we're living in, but taking necessity from the masses, that's those checks that parents were using to buy food for their kids and stuff, that extra money that Biden administration had signed into a piece of legislation that we now have people that have decided that it's not good because they think that people are taking the money and using it for all kinds of other things, but people were taking that check. The studies have showed that people were taking those checks to buy food and in daycare, put their kids in daycare so that they could continue to work. And so instead, as King says here, that they no longer take necessities from the masses. That check was a necessity for a lot of people, but now it'll, that money goes back to those folks that need the luxuries, the classes, as he says. A community in which all human beings will respect the dignity and worth of all persons personality. So I think for me, what makes this really troubling today as we talk about the King's philosophy of personalism and then his theology is because the beloved community is really what God desires of us. The beloved community is really that coming together of people, of God's people, so that we love one another. Beloved, let us love one another, right? For love is of God, and everyone that loveth, right? So, and then as scripture tells us to love our neighbors. And so that is that development of the of King's theology, the relatedness of God, how God relates to us and how we relate to God, and then how we relate to one another. And then, so finally, I want to read to you just briefly. The final thing is King's doctrine of human dignity. So, King added the theological element claiming that human beings possess absolute dignity because they are imbued with the image of God and are loved and sustained by God. Therefore, persons possess inherent dignity by virtue of relatedness to God. Imagine if we really believe that. I mean, if we really believe that. And then he goes on, Dr. Burrow says in his book, from this, we may conclude that every person is somebody because every person is a child of God, is related to God. As such, every person ought to be treated with dignity and respect. Moreover, human beings should not respond passively and nonchalantly when their dignity is threatened or undermined. Every person is sacred and possesses infinite worth because the image of God is stamped on their being. Martin Luther King reasoned that every person ought to be respected because God loves each and every one. What is more, King held, human worth lies in relatedness to God. A person has value because she is valued by God. Since God is the source of human dignity, it is not something that can be given or taken away. We may argue the point as to whether persons have value and worth solely because they are valued by God or whatever they have value apart from God. However, there is no question that King's doctrine of dignity was chiefly theistic and thus has its foundation in a supremely personal, loving, and creator God. It is therefore not difficult to understand why King also believed in the relational quality of life. All life is interrelated. So I hope now that you all are have a clear understanding of who King, what shaped King. And the reason why I thought it was important for us to start there tonight was because I am struggling with how we manage King Day and how we live in King Day, how we represent King Day. Um, I think so many times we think about King Day as being a time of awards and mark parades and marching and everything, and yet we do not even understand who King was and how he came to be the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, the leader of the civil rights movement, and a man that was just not one that talked about it, but he believed in what he was talking about. He believed in his work and how he became a man that believed in nonviolence. And because we don't understand those things, we live in the quotes of King. Every holiday, we see all of these quotes and things of King. People have it's become so easy for people to quote King, but yet not even understand these three very important traits and beliefs of King. And I'm going to tell you how I know that it's easier for people to quote King than to try to understand his work and his word. But first, I'm going to read to you all the comments that have come through. All right. So Sarah Gilbert says, I pray to God that King's dream come to fruition, especially his statement that the people not be judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. Thank you, Sarah, so much for that. And we're going to touch a little bit more on that particular quote of the dream also. Rachel says, how can I help make King's dream a reality? This is a good question. I have to really give this question some thought before I answer. I'm glad, Miss Rebecca, you asked this deep question. Thank you so much for your honesty, Rachel. I think that, to be honest with you, a lot of us need to give this question more thought, and we need to think about it through the beliefs of King, his philosophy, his theology, and also the doctrine of human dignity. Thank you, Sarah, for pointing out you love Dr. Burrow's writing. He was quite the writer. Ivan, thank you so much for joining us. Um, the brother-in-law of Dr. Rufus Burrow Jr. Thank you so much for joining. It is always important that we sit around the fire and as a community humbly lean forward to learn and edify. Absolutely. Absolutely. We should never stop learning. And to be honest with you, I think that a lot of um, our struggle right now is because we have not continued to teach the true essence of who Dr. King was as a person. And so I think that we have a lot of work to do with our current generation that's coming up, or if you have a grandchild or something, grab them up and start teaching them, and don't only teach them the "I have a dream" speech by King. Teach them why King felt so strongly about the dream and why it was important to him, the words that are in the dream. They weren't just random words that, that was pinned to paper, but it was a belief. And I think it's so important that we find a way to get back to a place where we are learning and that we lean into the learning. So let me go ahead and finish what I was trying to say before y'all know I'll get caught off track and start going on about something. So it is a lot of times what we do during King Day, we do things to bring attention to ourselves. King was not about bringing attention to himself. He was about bringing attention to the issues that was oppressing and suppressing people. So he was a large figure as far as, people knew him. They knew Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. But when King spoke, King wasn't talking about himself other than the struggle of Black people and he himself being a Black man. King was talking about the issues that were plaguing the people. And that's what he wanted to bring attention to. And so that's why sometimes on King Day, I think we get so caught up in the parades and the award ceremonies. And even if you go and decide to do a day of service somewhere, you're going, maybe to the soup kitchen to feed somebody, or you're going to the homeless shelter. Yeah, those are good things. But unless you're bringing attention to the issue, and a lot of times when we talk about those kind of things that we do when we go and volunteer, we talk about, oh, this I'm going to the soup kitchen to help feed the homeless. All right. Now bring attention to the issue. Why in America are there hungry people, people without food? Why in America are there people without shelter? That's bringing attention to the issue. And when you ask the why, then start trying to answer the question. What's the answer to the question? You ever do some strategic planning? We get to those 5 whys. Why are there homeless people in America? And keep getting to it and bring attention to those issues so that then on King Day, not only are we helping to serve people, but we're bringing attention so we can now remedy some of these issues that are plaguing our country and impacting people's lives. So it's one of the reasons why I have a major concern. I continue to have a major concern with pro-life. It's not that I am against pro-life, because I believe as long as you believe in Jesus that you are pro-life, because Jesus came to give life. But what I'm against is people that claim they're pro-life when really they're just pro-womb. That means they're only concerned as long as the baby is in the womb. They're not concerned after that. And yet, so they're not concerned about the issues. They're not concerned about the things that are impacting the life after life comes into this world. So you can't be concerned about only some things when you subscribe to the beloved community and human dignity. You have to be concerned about all of those things concerning life. And that means health insurance for people, affordable health insurance, access to health care. That means that you're concerned about this pandemic in the country, right? Because it impacts all of us, impacts all of human life. You're concerned about what's going on with voting rights. You're concerned about all of those things. If you really believe in what King was saying about the beloved community and the dignity of human beings. So, if we take those three fundamental beliefs that King carried with him during the marches, in jail, and at the boycotts, while preaching, while leading, while risking his life, and then even when dying, then we'll be better able to understand King's dream and how to get there. But as long as we diminish the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King into a few quotes, and typically those are taken out of context, and let's be honest, they're taken out of context because a lot of people don't even understand who King was, we'll continue to be bombarded by hypocrites who quote him but fight against his fundamental beliefs. And his fundamental beliefs, once again, I'm going to nail this, I'm going to drive it home tonight, y'all, is the dignity of all human beings, because all human beings have value, the beloved community, because we are all interrelated, and it is the only way to bring about justice, and then the philosophy of personalism. But too often, King's words are used as random quotes to fit an agenda instead of being used within the context and the understanding of King's doctrine of human dignity. So people like the one down here in Florida, the governor down here in Florida, that one guy, y'all know who he is by now, who loves to quote King, but has gone forth to develop redistricting legislation and try to suppress voters' rights as much as he can, and has introduced voters' legislations in hope of systematically dismantling people's right to vote. He quotes King, but he don't live in the truth of King's theology, philosophy, nor doctrine. So every day we hear and see King's words quoted, but we don't see the manifestation of King's dream, because the agendas of so many people who quote King don't really understand who King was nor share his beliefs. So I wish on King's Day people were more committed to studying what King believed about God, his doctrine of human dignity, King's beloved community, so that justice indeed rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. I wish on King's Day that we understand King's commitment to achieving the beloved community, so that we truly embrace the idea that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I wish on King's Day that we held true King's belief in our interrelatedness, so that little black girls and little white girls, little black boys and little white boys can together study the 1619 Project and critical race theory, and then declare we will never allow our country to dehumanize, disregard, disrespect, demonize, denigrate any person, regardless of their race, gender, ethnicity, ability, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, or age, or anything else that keeps people on outside of the beloved community. What I want is for us to understand who King was, what his beliefs were, the beliefs that stemmed from his soul, the beliefs that shaped his ministry as a called minister, preacher, pastor of God. I want us to understand who King was, not in a one, two, three, four quotes that we throw up there all the time. I want us to understand King from the perspective that I do. My ministry philosophy is that just like King, I see the preaching ministry as being a dual process. On the one hand, I must attempt to change souls so that societies will have a chance. On the other hand, I must attempt to change societies so that souls will have a change. That's what I want us to know about King. No more of these little quotes that we throw out on King Day or whenever it's convenient for us. Know who King was, know how he lived so that we can do better come next King Day. So that it's not just another holiday. It's not just another day where we post his picture on our social media pages. It's not just another day where we chill out and relax, but it's another day where we sit back and reflect on what has God called me to do to help achieve the beloved community? What has God called me to do to help remember and emphasize with my brothers and my sisters the dignity of all human beings? What has King helped me remember? Help me reflect on as I think about the interrelatedness of all of us. We are all interrelated. And I'm just going to be honest with y'all. Until we understand our interrelatedness, I said this way back when 2C Together talk started. Remember? I said this. Until we understand this, we will continue to pull each other down, hurt each other, and allow for false agendas and false narratives to compel us to be ignorant and without regard for human life and human beings. We can't just think that we're in this thing just for the left or the right or the center. We have to know that we're in this thing called life together. And I don't care if you're on the left extreme or the right extreme. Pretty soon it trickles right on down or right across all the stuff. And we are ultimately going to have to deal with that and understand that we are interrelated. And that's what King wanted us to know. Let me get to these comments, y'all, because I'm going on and on and on. I need to hear what y'all are saying. Rachel says, how can I help make King's dream a reality? I always want to speak the truth no matter what and not worry about who I make feel uncomfortable. No great leader ever backs down from speaking the truth. It is important to educate yourself, always so that others will follow in their footsteps of truth, not false reality. Dr. Rufus shows that when he spoke about Martin Luther King Jr., he really did his research very well about who King was as a person and his beliefs. He did not sugarcoat it. That's right. He didn't. He did not sugarcoat it. And I really believe that when this book was written, as in most instances when Rufus wrote about Dr. King, he wanted us to understand who King was so that we could begin to live in the reality of the dream. There's something that you said, Rachel, in your statement that I really appreciate, and that is that you say, I speak truth no matter what, and not worry about who I make feel uncomfortable. And I think that's what King's daddy had taught him early on. Listen, his daddy, King's daddy and his grandfather taught him. He was telling him that you can't allow people to disrespect you. You have to, you can't, because one, you have to remember the God in you, right? And so the God in you requires for you to speak truth to people. And every now and again, you have to remind people that I am a child of God. I was made in God's image. God lives in me. God lives around me. God lives above me. God lives all through me. And that's what you have to remind people of. And you have to tell them that truth so that they understand who you are as a person, that you are a human being. You're not just what the labels are, especially for black people and brown people a lot of times, that are labeled and stereotyped. For women who are taught that we are less than a lot of times, those sort of, no, that's not who we are. So so Mom says, you're preaching. Oh, thank you, Mother. And Darlene says, preach, Rev Rebecca. I'm sorry, y'all. Every now and again, the preach comes out. I think it's time for a sermon. That's what it is. Rachel, Miss Rebecca, that is why I say you're a woman of change. You step outside the box. You don't stay in the box. You're an empowering woman who always speaks your truth. That is what great leaders is. Amen. Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate that. Hello, Aunt Darlene. I'm glad you could join us for this evening as we continue our King Day celebration. Thank you so much for joining us. And yes, Mom, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do my best. So I want to just read a couple of more things to you as we prepare to close this conversation this evening. If you have not answered that question, I want you now to answer this question. Do you believe racism is dead? Do you believe racism is dead? I need for you to answer that question because so much of that is going on right now that people are suggesting that racism is dead. Um, and I don't necessarily believe that to be the truth, but maybe somebody else believes it to be the truth. So if so, I want you all to answer that. Answer that for me. And if you can't answer that question, I have another question for you. This one might be better for you. Do you think King's dream will ever be a reality? Now, listen, now that we all know our responsibility, I need for you all to let me know if you believe that King's dream will ever be a reality. There's something I want to touch on real quick, and I think it's important as we have this conversation because I don't want any of you to walk away this evening and say, "Yeah, but King had his flaws." Absolutely, King was a flawed man, and so I want to talk about the humanity of King. In the book, Dr. Burrow writes, Martin Luther King was pure and simple, a human being. His only sister, Christine King Ferris, sought to highlight this point not long after he was assassinated. Ferris reminds us that her brother did not just appear on the scene one day, fully formed and developed as if he had always been the extraordinary person he was without ever having been tried and tested in the fires of life. They think he simply happened, Ferris writes, that he appeared fully formed without context, ready to change the world. Take it from his big sister, that's simply not the case. King knew that he was not perfect, nor would he want to be an icon or placed on a pedestal. He was a human being. He made mistakes, some of which suggest that his character was flawed. Now, there's if you decide to pick up the book, Martin Luther King Jr. and the Theology of Resistance, uh, in the book, Dr. Burrow talks about some of King's issues with women. He talks about the challenges of plagiarism and some other things that have been talked about in the media sometimes, or even with right-leaning groups who's try to take away the significance of King's works. But that's covered in this book. And I think it will help you understand. But the reason I really wanted to talk about it this evening was a lot of times when we think about King, we do place him on a pedestal without remembering he's a human being. And I think that's what limits us in our own ability to engage in the work, right, of building equity, inclusion. A lot of times, injustice. A lot of times, because we put King on a pedestal and we make him an icon, we think those are the traits needed for us to do the work of justice, equity, and inclusion. Those are not requirements. Those are not the requirements. Anybody that has a heart and the compassion and the concern for their fellow human beings, that understands our interrelatedness and understands the dignity of all human beings, human dignity. If you know those things, then you can do the work. Matter of fact, you have a responsibility to do the work. And that's what I think is so important about King being a flawed human being, but still willing to get out there and do the work. People talked about King. He knew they talked about him. King talked about himself sometimes in some ways that were because he knew he was flawed. And so there was things he knew he needed to work on. He was a human being in process, but yet he kept doing the work. He did the work because he understood that he was required by God to care and show compassion for others, to be concerned about the well being and the lives of others, and most importantly, to balance the scales of justice. That was his requirement. And so when we want to sit and talk about King being flawed, that's fine. We're flawed. You know, we look in the mirror every day and make that an excuse for us not doing some big things in life. Listen, okay, preach moment. I'm going to pause and let you know. God will use your flaws, right? You know, we see that all throughout the word of God in the Bible. If you're a Bible believing person, all throughout the Bible, God used flawed people to do the work and to make things happen. The problem is we get so caught up in the outside, the persona and all that stuff for people. We get caught up in that about ourselves that we forget that God can still use us. And so, what I am challenging you today is that regardless of your flaws, regardless of your shortcomings in life, regardless of whoever said you can't do it because you either a woman or you're gay, you're straight or whatever, regardless of any of that, allow God to use you to do the work. Walk in the example of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, flawed man and all, that was still able to do the work and believed in the work so much that his life was taken from him in the midst of the work. So I just want us to get busy, y'all. That's all. I want us to do the work, right? That's what I'm trying to say to y'all. Sarah said we are all flawed in some aspect. Absolutely. Every last one of us have a flaw because we're all sin. You know, we all have we have all fallen. That's just the reality of it. And thank God for his redeeming grace, for redemption. We thank God for redemption, for salvation. But the truth of the matter, every day that we live this human existence in these natural bodies that have desires and weaknesses. And all we can do is keep trying to do better from day to day. That's all we can do. Aunt Darlene says, I don't believe it is dead. Absolutely. We're talking about racism. Racism has existed since Abraham and before. And I believe Aunt Darlene is not talking about Abraham Lincoln, just so y'all know. She's talking about Abraham, Bible Abraham. And so I don't think it will never be a time when it will be no more. And even if we believe that it will never be no more, we have to do everything we can to eradicate racism. Rachel says, no, racism is not dead because there's still ignorant people. Now, Rachel, you just used one of my husband's words. And when he used ignorant, he used it for the true meaning of ignorant. Not that people, are just foolish or whatever. It's ignorant to understanding why racism exists to begin with, so that then we can find a way to eradicate racism. So, because there are still ignorant people out there, sugarcoating the truth, in my opinion, until people really dig deep and realize that racism is even more worse than ever and really come together in unity to have that talk about how to overcome it, this world will continue to live a lie. Wow. Sarah said King's dream will become a reality. In my mind, King was a modern day prophet. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, racism is alive and kicking. All right. So we still have some issues, right? We still got some work to do. That's the thing. And we all are responsible. I don't care of your age or any of that. We are all responsible for doing this work. We all must share in making the dream a reality. Listen, I believe the word of God. It's more of us for great and for community than there's not. The challenge is that a lot of those that are against the beloved community are the ones with the money. And those are the ones that have perceived power. And I say perceived power because the truth of the matter is God is all powerful. God is all knowing. We know that. And so God really has the power. And as long as we stay on God's side, then we have the power, but we got to start tapping into that. We have to start believing that. And that's a sermon for another day or another Tuesday together talk. I, I did not want to preach to you all this evening, but I really wanted you all to understand the importance of King's holiday, based on King's life, based on the truth of King, who King was. And so for those of you that are just now joining or that had joined late, we talked about King's philosophy, which King was a personalist. We talked about the theology of King, King believing in the beloved community and the relatedness of God, and we also talked about the doctrine of human dignity. And I hope that you all now have a better glimpse of who King was and uh, and now how you might be able to have the conversation and carry that conversation forward as you move through, your work week. You got one more day of work, maybe, if you get the weekends off. If not, you have a few more days. But also how you might be able to now share some new information about King. Let me know if you all learned something new about King tonight. Just drop it real quickly in the comments section. I would love to hear if you learned something new about King tonight, and if this is something maybe you can help share with your friends or your family members, or when you hanging out with your sister girlfriends or your boys or whatever y'all call each other now. I haven't been out hanging out with it so long, but is this some information you might be able to share that will help people better understand why King Day is so important, but why we celebrate King and the life of King is very important for us to be able to really walk in the fullness of the holiday, and also to make sure that the dream becomes a reality. Um, that's all I have for y'all tonight, right? That's all I have. Let me get to this last comment. Ivan says, will the dream ever be realized? It is my belief that the answer lies within our perspective of the question, more specifically, the dichotomy of dream versus reality. The question as posed deals on a singular Q to A, but its answer is embedded in the journey, and the dream can be achieved through our fervent journeys. Thank you, Ivan. Y'all can tell that's a brother-in-law to Rufus. Now, y'all can only imagine the conversations those two might might have had. So thank you, Ivan, for that. I appreciate your comments. That's very important. And so I do want people to think about Martin's dream. And as you go through, just decide, do you think it could be realized? Uh and maybe not in this lifetime. But I think if we find a way to teach our children, and that's not, us just teaching black children, but also teaching white children. Y'all know that's why I said there's such an issue with this whole idea of critical race theory in school. One, I think that it's really just been something to be a distraction. But the other thing is, I think that people are concerned that if their children are taught the truth, that they will make the decision to, especially the children that are coming up in a more multicultural society, that these children will make the decision that they want different. They want different. They want to live different. They want to live in unity and harmony. There will always be a fringe of the society that will never want to live in complete harmony or in a community. But for most people, and especially these children coming up, I believe that they will want to live in harmony. Rachel says, I definitely did learn something. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Miss Rebecca, for this deep conversation. God bless you. I have enjoyed this Tuesday Together talk tonight. Thank you so much. Now, I appreciate you all so very much for just hanging out and joining this conversation this evening. I thank you for adding your voice to the conversation. And I thank you for just, giving me an opportunity to share my husband's work. You all know that his work was very important to him, and it's very important to me, now that he is no longer on this side of things. And so I won't do this on a regular basis, but I will do it from time to time, and especially when we talk about King. But not only do I want you all to know that, um, well, I told you about the book tonight, but I also want you to know, as I was talking about personalism, there is another book by Dr. Rufus Burrow Jr., Personalism, A Critical Introduction. Rufus Burrow Jr. If you want to learn more about personalism, you can definitely find these books on Amazon, or wherever you might buy your books. You should be able to find them there. So there is just an important work for us all to do. And I appreciate you all just hanging out with me. I'll have these two more comments. Um, Darlene says, thank you, Reverend Rebecca. Every time I walk into all white setting, which is the norm here in Colorado, I will think of Dr. MLK and his sacrifice to make it possible. Yes, Darlene, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Darlene. It's good to see you, Darlene. I miss you. Reverend Rebecca, you are very much appreciated. And I'm so glad you're back. Thank you all so much. I appreciate each and every one of you. Carolyn, my mom, says, very well done. Thank you, Mom. Thank you so much. I'm still working through and processing my grief, y'all. So I've told y'all just be patient with me. I'm not going to be in this state of grief forever, but it is a process. And I do know that, life was forever changed for me, but I'm so thankful for God that God has continued to heal me. He's healing my heart, healing my mind. And it's because of you all that helps me come on and push through. Come on and push through. I also want to thank y'all once again for allowing me to change the day. Now, Tuesday Together Talk will go back to Tuesday. This Thursday thing was okay for this one time, but I do want you to know that Tuesday Together Talk will be on Tuesday, and we are still at every other week. So I won't see you on this Tuesday coming, which is we're still in January. So I won't see you on January 25th. I will see you again on hmm, February 1st. Wow. So listen, that's Black History Month, y'all. Ain't no telling how I might come back then, right? God bless you all. Again, I'm Reverend Rebecca Burrow. I am founder and CEO of Building Reconciliation, Inclusion, Diversity, and Gender Equity, where you can find us at www.reconciliationandequity.com, or you can always follow us on Facebook, which I hope you do. You follow us. Tell your friends to follow us. Matter of fact, share this video, y'all. Share this video. Share it on your page or whatever. Share the video. I want us to continue to be educated. So you can follow us on Facebook at Reconciliation and Equity. We're also on Instagram at Reconciliation and Equity. And we're on YouTube at Reconciliation and Equity. So thank you all so much. I hope you all have a great night. Be safe out there and you have a good weekend. And know that I love you, but God loves you even more. So stay safe and make sure you take care of God's children. God bless you all. Love you and have a good night.